Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. My name is Walt Thiessen. Today is Wednesday, February 6, 2013, and with me today is Gabe Berman. Gabe is the author of Live Like a Fruit Fly, which was published by HCI in 2011. A native New Yorker now living in Florida, he advocates living a more joyful, worthwhile, and abundant life. He says it's all about living in the moment. And he is with us today to tell us, well, how he does it. Gabe Berman, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So, Live Like a Fruit Fly, how did that start? Where did the impetus from that come from?
Well, I was actually sitting in after college, I had many sales jobs because as a writer, you don't just become a writer. You have to grind it out somehow, usually.
Right.
And I didn't know what to do, so I just had a couple of sales jobs, and by a couple I mean like 17. And one of them, I was sitting in, and I figured out a way to make the sale without really doing much of the legwork, legally, I must tell you.
Cool.
And my office got angry at me, the owners, and I was thinking, like, this is absolutely ridiculous, because they wanted me to go out there and pound it, and I just didn't think it was necessary. There was a way around it and more efficient, so why not do it that way?
Sure.
So I was sitting around, and I said, you know what, I have to start living like a firefly, because I thought that I once read an article about how fireflies only lived very short lives, but it was actually fruit flies after I looked it up.
Yeah.
So at that moment, I wrote down live like a fruit fly. I'd lived like a firefly, and I crossed that out, and I did a little search, and I realized it was live like a fruit fly, because fruit flies live in about 10 days, sometimes one day, sometimes a little bit longer, and we feel like our lives are much longer than that because, you know, obviously they are, but they click away in the exact same quick rate. So that's where it comes from, that you can't waste this one life that you have on things that you absolutely hate. Life is too short, and you owe it to yourself to follow your passions. And
that book's been pretty successful for you since its publication. What are some of the basic ideas that you include in there? I mean, obviously, like you say, it's about not letting the good stuff pass you by, but give us a little more taste of it. What did you actually share with your readers then, and what do you share now with your blogging and so forth?
Well, I feel like the most important part of the book, because there are a million Seize the Day books out there.
Sure.
But I kind of changed it from Seize the Day to Seize This Day, because Seize the Day, you can read that and you'll be like, oh yeah, all right, 3 months from now I'm going to get going on this, or 4 years from now, when everything is settled, I'm going to start writing, or I'm going to start, drawing, or becoming an actor, or even if I always wanted to be an accountant, but I'm stuck playing second base for the Yankees. One day I'm going to start being an accountant, because I hate playing baseball. Nothing is really about the future, because you just don't know. It's all about, let's see what you can do today to make it happen. And the real difference between the way I wrote my book and other books out there is that I don't come across as some spiritual guru guy, because I'm not. And I wrote it because I hate those books. They always come across like they know this magic secret, and then they give you this 50-step program. And I just speak to you as if you and I are friends since college, or even since before that, and we are sitting down one night and we're just talking to each other from the heart. And thankfully, the biggest review that I get from that, the most popular review, is, I've heard this in a way before, but not exactly like this. At this time, it's coming from a best friend, and now I'm starting my life. So now, to answer your question, some of the lessons are, it's appreciation, but not in the typical gratitude way of like writing out your gratitude list and dwelling on sports cars, so maybe that'll come into your life. It's nothing like that. It's really just actively appreciating what's in front of you right this second, regardless of how horrible it is, because there's always something there that can turn around. And I've tested myself with that millions of times, and it actually works. And that's just one little example. And another example is just, no matter what's in front of you, you can always start following your passions. Just start. Like, no matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, even if your wife hates you, or your husband thinks you're wasting your time, or your kids think you're crazy, or your parents think you're insane and you go to chiropractic school, if you want to do something exceptional, then start it, and you're the only thing that's going to make it happen.
the idea of appreciating something that's right in front of you, even when it's a negative, that's a challenge a lot of people trip over. And even when they get it, they still trip over it. So what's the secret there? Well, I guess it isn't a secret because you don't like the idea of a secret, but how do you do that?
You force yourself to find something that you can appreciate of. And I'll just be completely blunt with you, and I kind of like been hiding this from many people, but now here we are, so I might as well say it. When I wrote my book, I was thinking about, well, will I really be able to handle this if something horrible happened to me? Because it's easy to write about when you don't have anything horrible in front of you. It's like, oh yeah, you had your leg chopped off, now go be thankful for that. It's very tough when you can't deal with it, and that's when I was writing my book. I was like, I wonder if I can really pull this off. And unfortunately, out of nowhere, a year ago, my dad got diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer.
Oh,
so here I was. Thank you, man. But here I was in the middle of it, like my book's out, I'm Mr. Fruit Fly, and just, thank things, be grateful and follow your passions, and now it's in front of me. Exactly the ultimate, I hate to say test, but that's what it was.
Right.
So right away, I'm there at the doctor's office with my dad and hearing what's going on, and I hear my book in the back of my head, and I could have made a choice right there. I'd be like, well, screw it. This is real life now, and it's not about living like a fruit fly. It's about dealing. And behind that was, I'm not going to be a hypocrite no matter what. And that's where I've lived my life the whole time. So I looked for the little miracles in everything. And I have to tell you, man, it says in my book, if you keep on digging for the silver lining, that you'll eventually find it.
Mm-hmm.
And you owe it to the person that you're dealing with to keep on finding the silver lining, and I found it.
You did.
And I find it all the time. And yeah, I just to be able to make my dad smile every day was completely worth it, and it was worth it for both of us. And I was dwelling on that more than anything else. It sucks. There's no way around it. And the truth is, you just got to keep on digging, and you will find it. But that, the active appreciation part is just a very small part of my book.
Mm-hmm.
But, I have to say that I'm not patting myself on the back that I was able to find the silver lining in the most horrific of situations. And even my family and my friends and everybody else was looking at me like, how are you sitting there even smiling? It's like, I'm not going to sit here at a funeral that didn't happen yet. Like, I'm going to look for that silver lining at all times. So, but that's a small part of the fruit fly thing. Most of it is going after what you believe in no matter what. And it's not always like being very peaceful and spiritual. It's about sometimes, there are people who have their back against the wall, and you sometimes have to be who you're not to be who really you are. That wasn't even English, was it? I just sounded like Yoda. Let's do that again. Sometimes you have to be who you're not to be who you are, which means that I was in a restaurant once, and I tell this story, and this girl who had Down syndrome was working at the place too, and there were other guys there who were just being so mean to her. And like, I'm going to fight all these guys right now because this is not very fruit fly-ish and not very peaceful to start a fight, but like, this girl deserves this. So I went absolutely bananas, and I ended up not having to fight because I was willing to. And that was just one of those situations where, if I'm going to live like a fruit fly and time is very short here, this girl deserves someone to stand up for her. So that's just another facet of the book.
Right. Yeah, that's probably the trickiest part about all this is trying to figure out how to put aside the difficult stuff so that, like you say, you can actually just go after what you want to go after. Because I know in my own life, I'm sure that for virtually all of our listeners at one time or another at least, we've run into times where it just seems like there's no way to get ourselves to take the next step. And yet, as you point out, you have to take the next step. And I guess that's really the challenge of life, finding a way to take another step, to take some step in some direction and just start walking or taking action or whatever it takes to basically resurrect dreams that perhaps have been tarnished or put aside or whatever. And that sounds like it's really what the main message is you were trying to put out.
That is the main message, but there are two books that I find that are out there. There are books when someone tells you that, like, the Buddha is going to be disappointed in you if you don't take the step. And I'm like, yeah, well, who cares? The Buddha's dead. That's the way I always thought. And the other one is, like, there's a guy, like, when you're on the crew team, there's someone yelling at you through that megaphone, like, to row. Like, that doesn't work for me either. Like, don't yell at me. Mine is, Like, I am your little friend, and I'm sitting on your shoulder, and I'm just saying, listen, man, just make it happen, because we have no idea about tomorrow. And are you going to allow yourself to sit in an office one day and then a plane crashes into your building and you never got to live your dreams? I mean, you really owe it to yourself to make it happen. And a lot of my book is about doors are not just going to open for you. You have to sometimes really kick through them. And once you kick through the door, you might have to kick through the next door. You might actually put your shoulder through the next one, but then maybe the next one after that will open. And I wouldn't allow myself to just write a book in theory, because that's exactly how I got my book published, like kicking doors open with my feet, and then the doors started to fly open, thankfully.
That's an interesting subject all by itself, how authors, particularly new authors, get themselves published. Let's just take one short passage here and talk about that, because that's really tough, and I'm sure you did have to kick through doors, but just give us like a little 30-second tale. What doors did you kick through? What doors did you find were just locked? I mean, how did you actually just keep going and going and going, despite the fact that all the doors seem to be closed or blocked?
Well, I say in my book that my whole life I always wanted to be a writer, but the thing is, I would never turn on my computer to write. I would never pick up the pen, because I'm like, but why? I'm not Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm not the Dalai Lama, and there's no way that anyone's going to look at my books, so why should I bother? So I never did. And all I did was complain about it until one friend finally said, you are never allowed to talk to me again until you start writing.
Ooh.
But all right, maybe this is the time that I start writing. So I finally started writing, and I wrote complete nonsense for 2 years, just like, John Lennon said that the only one thing he writes about is himself, because it's what he knows best, so that's what I did. Just rambling about my life, but in a way that just in case anybody wants to see this, it was very publishable. I only write about myself, but only so someone can relate to it. I'm always thinking about what the reader wants to know, so I don't go off on tangents that mean nothing to anybody. Like, will always be to someone would be like, oh yeah, I've done the same thing. So I did that for about 2 years. This is going to be more than 30 seconds. I hope that's okay.
That's all right. No, more than 30 seconds is fine. I was trying to limit your requirement. That's all.
Okay. I can squeeze into maybe 30 seconds. So then I bumped into this girl who we went to college together, and she said, oh, what are you doing with yourself? And I'm like, oh, I'm in some horrible sales job, but I'm just trying to write. She's like, oh, well, I'm a writer. And we were talking about it, and I emailed her some of my stuff, and she ended up loving it. But even that was an impossible process, because just to get her to be like, oh, I'm a writer, all right, take care, bye. Like, she didn't want to hear about it. She just wanted to leave,
Right.
So I had to beg her to give me a business card, which she did. And then I was back home, and I'm like, I don't want to email this girl. She doesn't even want to hear from me. But I knew that this is one of those things that, I started writing, this little window opened up. Just in case I have to send her something. She'll probably hate it because I'm ridiculous in my writing, so we'll see what happens. And within an hour, she emailed me back. She's like, oh, I absolutely love it. So I'm like, okay, now I know that a real writer likes my stuff. I'm just going to keep on going. And in my head, I'm like, all right, I'll keep on going for another year, and we'll see what happens. A week later, I get a call from the Miami Herald, and they said, we want you to write our nightlife column. We have a very good recommendation. And a week after that, my first column appeared in the Miami Herald, one of the biggest newspapers on the planet, and I had a whole page out of nowhere.
Where did that come from? Did you ever find out?
Well, the girl from this cafe that I bumped into, she said she was writing for the Herald, and she called the Herald and said, I have somebody for you. But here's the little catch, and this is part that you might not want to follow out there, but I know that I had to. They said, oh, you must be writing your whole life, and you know about the entire nightlife scene in Miami. I'm like, of course I know it. When I knew nothing. I mean, I hung out in bookstores. I knew nothing about the bands or the drink specials. I knew. So they said, okay, well, we can't just give you this column. We have to have you go out there and write a test column. So I go out and I write about this jazz band, and I love jazz, so I knew what was going on. The piano player was 90% deaf and completely blind. You can write a whole book about this guy. So I'm there, writing about it and taking all these notes and about the drink specials. And I get home that night, and I had no idea what to do to write my column. I was completely lost. I'm not a journalist. I have no clue. I know how to write comedy things. So I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to waste my biggest opportunity of all time, and I'm just going to write the way I write, just so I know. Because they'll probably hate it, and I won't get the job with the Herald. But if they love it, I can do whatever I want afterwards. So 80% of the column was about how the air conditioning was so horrible in that place, and 20% of the column was about the piano player. And maybe they didn't. All I did is talk about how people overdressed in Miami and how hot it was, and I was sweating looking at everybody. and I barely like, oh yeah, there's a blind piano player, by the way, like the end. And they loved it for whatever reason. So I really took this big chance, and then I was able to write, for 8 years I wrote the nightlife columns on the Miami Herald, and my columns were absolutely ridiculous. Like, he was like, oh, let's see what's going on this weekend, and then you would have to read 500 pages of why I didn't like the movie Police Academy. Like, it had nothing to do with anything. so that was just completely following my gut, but it worked out so well. The next thing is, so I write this fruit fly book after I was stuck in some other horrible job, because as a writer for the newspaper, you're still really not making so much money.
Right. And
I wrote this book, and I thought, oh, I'm this big writer for the Miami Herald. And unless you're already Moses or Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or someone of those guys, no one wants to know anything about you. I thought, like, I would get a million publishers hounding me. No one would publish it whatsoever. No one would even open my letter saying, hey, I wrote this great book. I was cursed. So what I did was, I didn't quit. I mailed the same people the same different letters like 5 different times, like pretending I'm somebody else who wrote this fruit fly book, and nothing worked. And I did that for years, and I finally said, you know what? This is the door that I have to kick open, and I self-published it.
Ah.
So I self-published it, and I put it out there, and that whole process of kicking open so many doors, I had so many splinters in my feet. Then, by some miracle, but I know in my gut it's because of Keep on Pushing. My friend was looking at my self-published book on Amazon, and her new friend was like walking behind her at her desk at home, and she's like, "Oh, Live Like a Fruit Fly. That's such a cool title. What's that about?" And that second person was the acquisitions editor to my publisher, who is the original publisher for Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I got published by them by just keep on sticking with my gut and kicking doors open, and then, here I am talking to you.
There is a certain serendipity going on there for sure.
Yeah. And I guess the final door that I kicked open was that I became friends with this guy named Alan Combs, who's a national syndicated radio host, and I know he is friends with Deepak Chopra, the best-selling spiritual guy probably of all time.
Right.
And an endorsement from him would really help. And I was so nervous about asking Alan to see if he can get Deepak Chopra to endorse my book. So I finally got around to doing it, and now it's just such a whole tough position going back and forth with Alan and with Deepak Chopra's assistant, and they really didn't want to do it. So I just kept on hounding them, because I don't care. Like, if you want to hate me, that's fine, but either you're going to say yes or you're going to say no. But Deepak finally read my book, and he loved my book, and right now, as we speak, his endorsement's on my book. So none of that would have happened if I just sat there and let the universe said, okay, universe, bring me all these great bits. Like, you have to say to the universe, okay, I'm going to do this, but now it's going to meet me halfway. But that meeting halfway, it will never look like the way you thought it looked like. This is a great interview for you. You don't even have to do anything. I can just sit here and talk. You can sit there and relax.
Actually, a lot of my interviews go that way, so that's quite all right, because the point from my perspective and from listeners' perspective is to find out what you have to say. So actually, I like that a lot. But what you're describing there is quite fascinating to me, because well, first of all, there are a lot of people who self-publish in the hopes of getting themselves perhaps noticed by a publisher. Very few actually manage to do it, and yet you did it. That's quite an accomplishment all by itself. And the way it happened was somewhat serendipitous, to be sure. But it wasn't just serendipity, because, like you said, you were kicking in doors. You were actually figuring out ways to actively go after one particular endorsement, not just any endorsement, but one of the biggest endorsements you can get in the self-help field, Deepak Chopra. And you got it.
But it could not have worked out any better. I mean, maybe if I somehow got the Dalai Lama, but I'd rather have Deepak Chopra, because he's more relevant,
Sure.
So and never, when I wrote this book, I never thought anyone would even read it. Maybe just me and my mom when I was writing the book. Like, I knew that I had to write it, and I knew people really. I tell people that if you had a time machine, this is going to be your favorite book, so you might as well buy it now, so you don't have to wait until someone says, "Hey, just go buy the book." But I didn't know that people would actually buy it. I just knew that it had to be written. So that's why I did it. Maybe people don't get to the same point because they're writing stuff that. Yeah, I'll just write this because we'll just see what happens. Like, I feel like it has to come from that burning place that you have to do it, but not just with writing. It could be with, if you want to be a professional balloon folder, like that's where that has to come from, that place where you know that this has to be done.
Since I'm an LOA guy, I'm the kind who will not blink at all at the idea that despite everything, you were able to get Deepak Chopra to do what he did. But there are going to be a lot of people who would just say, well, you were just lucky. I mean, you know, the average person who tries to become a writer and they write a book, you know, something like Live Like a Fruit Fly, they aren't going to get Deepak Chopra to endorse their book. They're not going to get Oprah Winfrey to endorse the book. What's his name? Mike Dooley, the inspirational speaker, says, you know, Oprah's not calling. but Deepak did get back to you. He did do it. How do you explain that?
But if they say you got lucky, I'd say, you know, you're totally right, because I'm good. I definitely have skill, but there are a lot of people out there who have skill. And you just have to make those little windows open up for you. In my book, I call them breadcrumbs. That there's a trail of breadcrumbs that you leave kind of for yourself once you start being active. And if you don't pick up those breadcrumbs, there's no way. But even if I did leave these breadcrumbs, if I kicked all the doors and I wrote the greatest book and I made all these things happen and I even got self-published and I even got published by a real publisher, there's a phenomenal chance of not getting the endorsement. So it's not going to happen for everyone. And yes, I did get lucky, but the thing is, like, at one point do you say that you were like the catalyst to this miraculous event? Because if I didn't believe and if I didn't keep on pushing, it definitely wouldn't have happened. It's kind of not that I'm anywhere in the level of McCartney and Lennon, but everyone's like, oh, the Beatles. How can we just get on to the American TV show? And no one understands, not no one, but people don't understand that they were in this little crappy club in Hamburg, Germany for years playing and having like bottles thrown at them for so many years. Like, no one's an overnight success. It's unless like you're Justin Bieber or somebody like that. But even him, like, there's some kid who has talent. There's a million kids out there who has talent. He put a YouTube video out there and he got a following. But how many people actually just even take that extra step?
Oh, yeah.
It's all about going the extra step. And then, yeah, it's definitely luck, and I'm so grateful that it happened this way. But, you know, things happen if you keep going after them.
But that's the thing. How do you keep going after something that seems so impossible? Because if I had written your book, Live Like a Fruit Fly, and I was thinking I want to get Deepak Chopra, I'd probably be defeated right from the get-go because I know what the odds are. The odds are so unlikely, and yet the odds didn't stop you.
Because I didn't really think like, oh, how do I get Deepak Chopra? I just knew Alan was friends with him, and that's when I went after it. Like, that was just it was a little breadcrumb in front of me that I was going after. If I just wrote my book, I'm like, I'm going to go after Deepak Chopra. I mean, the odds of that they're so remote. Like, you just need to know somebody on the inside. Another endorsement like that, which isn't in the book because it came out afterwards, was I just met on Twitter. I was talking about nothing to somebody on Twitter, and my book came up in the Twitter conversation. Some other person was reading it. This person was friends with Michael Jackson's last producer of that last tour that he did, and he just did all the music for the Obama inauguration, and his name is Michael Bearden. He's really connected, obviously, and out of nowhere, I didn't even ask for him. I didn't even know about it. He sent me an email with a one-page endorsement, like a whole page, like how blown away he was about how all kept on going and how he loves my book. And when I wrote my book, I wasn't thinking, I'd love to get Michael Jackson's producer on this thing. Like, it just happened. And once again, I'm so grateful that it did.
Right, yeah. Do you believe that there is a connection going on there, or is it just another case of serendipity?
No, I believe that serendipity is the connection.
Oh.
Like, I definitely believe that the universe is completely connected, and although there's tons of horrible things going on out there, there's also these beautiful connections that they're there for you to follow.
So it's a question of what, finding the connections, or just continuing going and letting the connections find you, or a
just
combination?
Keeping your head up and creating the connections and then following them once they're there. But also, it's Live Like a Fruit Fly. The subtitle is The Secret You Already Know, because we all know that we're dying. I mean, with the second we're born, the clock starts ticking.
Right.
And we all live like, oh, no, I'll get to it next week. And then the next day you wake up and you're 70. or the next day you wake up and you went to college and the next day you wake up and the college is over. And we all know what that feels like. But, oh my God, where those 4 years go so quickly. So it sounds doom and gloom, but to me, like, life is just being reminded, like, it's not going to be here. Like, I constantly hear that click, that ticking in the sky of, come on, man, the clock is ticking and you have to keep going. And it's scary to ask somebody can you please get Deepak Chopra to read my book today anyway? Like, who wants to say that? It's, like, very nerve-wracking, but, like, we're all going to die. Me, Deepak, you, we're all dead. So why not? It's like, just keep on going and make it happen. But I say it that way, and it sounds dramatic, but it's just the truth. So you don't have to rush around your whole life being like, oh my God, I have to keep on going. There's plenty of time to sit around and listen to Miles Davis. There's plenty of time to enjoy life. But if you don't follow your passions, there's no way that you're going to fully enjoy it. It's impossible.
Right, because what you're basically saying is there are a couple of different ways to look at the idea of our lives are limited. We're only going to go for a certain period of time, and then we're done here. And one way to look at it is to just throw in the towel and just, go with the flow and not worry about anything. Another way to look at it is to be an A personality and go, 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 go. Right. The third way to do it is to do a combination. Sometimes go, 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 sometimes sit back and enjoy and smell the flowers. And what you're basically saying is no matter which of those approaches you decide to take, make sure you're doing what you really want to go after. Because if you're not going after what you're going to go after, regardless of whether your life is limited or not, what's the point? Why even be here?
Right. Because even if you don't make it, let's say you want to be a writer, or let's say you want to be a doctor, or let's say you want to be anything, and you're stuck doing something else. And if it's a doctor, let's say you start reading the medical books and you start getting involved with it, but you never become a doctor. At least you tried. Mm-hmm. And you can sit there on your deathbed and say, hey, I gave it a shot, unlike most people who just live lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah.
You have to at least try. And the beautiful thing is that's when the breadcrumbs start going. You wanted to be a doctor, but you get to med school and you didn't get in, but as you're talking to some other person who did got in, he's like, oh, well, my brother-in-law does this. Like, oh, I'd love to do that. And then look at that door that you never even know about unless you started going down this one path. One path leads to another. I didn't cover this in this book, but I'm writing about it. I just wrote about it the other night because I'm writing the sequel. And, now that with my dad and what's going on, it's very easy to say, it's like, why bother with all this fruit fly stuff? It's because life could be so horrible. And I really felt like I needed to address that. It's not just about like, well, I still have to follow my passions and I still have to make it great. I believe that if you're on this path of wanting to live a decent life and make your heart happy and be kind to other people, part of it is that I just finally figured this out. Like, I might have answered the question of why are we here? And it is just to make things more beautiful because things could be so ugly. So just for that, even if you don't become a professional writer or a doctor or a balloon folder, you can still just try to make things more beautiful. And that's what's going to be in the sequel to my book.
Okay. What you're going through with your father, actually, I can relate to very directly because I lost my father to symptoms related to Parkinson's disease in March 2008. And actually, for me, the toughest part was not when he died. The toughest part was helping him go through what he went through leading up to his death.
100%.
The amazing part for me was I didn't realize it till afterward, but I had actually done all my grieving before he died. And when he died, it was a relief. And it was like, oh, wow, he's in a great place now. I don't have to worry about it anymore. He's feeling better now. And in fact, I'm not sure if you buy into this kind of thing, but my sister has some psychic abilities. She actually got a message from him to kind of confirm everything was okay. And to me, the contrast between what it was like leading up to his passing and what it was like afterward is the opposite of what we would normally expect. But it was truly a night and day where the night came first and the day came second. Just amazing.
Yep, and I'm with you on that 100%. And I completely, and this is one of those things that you and I are almost having a private conversation right now because unless you've lived that, there's no way to understand it. I mean, you can be it doesn't matter what level of how empathetic you are. You can be a professional empath for a living, and there's no way to know that until you've lived it.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can't really know it. I mean, those of us who are living it or who have lived it, we can express our amazement at it. We can express our surprise at it. But you're right. Somebody who hasn't gone through it, all they hear is the amazement and the surprise. They don't really sense what it feels like to watch my father as he went through a series of deteriorations, even though his body was in perfect shape. I mean, my dad had lived a full life. He died at age 89. He could easily have lived past 100. If not for the Parkinson's, his body was in great shape. His mind was sharp. Everything was perfect. It's just that the Parkinson's basically eventually got into his throat, prevented him from eating, and killed him by starvation. If not for that, he'd probably be alive today. He'd probably be just going right along. But not only was there that aspect of it, there was the aspect of watching the man I had loved so much withdraw. My dad was one of the most gregarious people you will ever know. He was not gregarious in the sense of being an extrovert. He was gregarious in the sense of wanting to know people and love them and care about them and take interest in them and so forth. And to watch him become a mask, to actually wear a mask on his face and become more and more withdrawn was surreal. I to this day, I feel like I lost my dad 2 years before he died. Because I didn't recognize the guy who I saw the last 2 years. I loved him. I related to him. I could, every once in a while, he could break through what I call the Parkinson's shell or the Parkinson's mask and show that other side of him. And it would last for 5 seconds or something like that. Say, oh, it's my dad. I see him. And then it would disappear again. The experience of watching that and being a part of that. You're right. I don't know how to explain that to somebody who hasn't been through it.
And then you would have every right to say, you know what, I don't really feel like following my passion or doing anything. Because what's the goddamn difference? After that, it's so cruel. I'm not doing a thing. But when I wrote my book, I was thinking about that because there was this kid that I went to high school with who lost his life on 9/11 in one of the towers. Mm. And what do you tell the family? Here I am trying to give the advice, and it's this. I'm not going to cover this, and I'm a sham. And I really feel like you need to keep on digging for that silver lining because you almost owe it to that person because they would want you to keep on digging for the silver lining if the roles were reversed. And that's what I was thinking.
Great point.
So, it's easy for me right now to I'm not doing any damn interviews. I'm not writing anymore. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing and just waste away because what's the point? And then I would think would my dad really want me to do that? And if the roles were reversed, there's no way I'd want him to just sit around and mope. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thinking about and kind of dwelling on the idea of what would that other person who went through the horrible thing and you kind of went through it with them, what would they want for you? And right. You're exactly right. That's what my dad would want for me. He wouldn't want me to dwell on that. He would want me to keep going with my passions and with my dreams and my life. He would want me to live my life. And that's really, it's amazingly important. I don't even know why it's so important, but it is.
Yeah, and on some mystical way, or not even mystical, we just know in our guts. I can sit around here and mope, and I have every right to, and I am going to mope for a while. And maybe I'll mope a little bit every day, but I still kind of owe it to him to keep pushing a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And to make the world more beautiful. And, maybe if I write another crazy book about fruit flies or if I write a Star Wars spoof, maybe I'll bump into someone, hey, I love your Star Wars spoof. Here's $500 million for cancer research. You never know. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of stories that kind of fit that mold. One of the stories that comes to my mind is the group of women in the United Kingdom who are a member of a local women's, I think called the Women's Institute, the WI, and the WI is it's always a local chapter that it's kind of like the American equivalent of the Rotary Club or something like that, but it's for women. And what this particular WI decided to do, which kind of blew the socks off of what everybody else did, is that they decided that these middle-aged women were going to do a nude calendar, and they were going to try to sell that nude calendar.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a movie done about it called Calendar Girls. But it's the same kind of thing. They just did this thing. They kind of went past their comfort zone, and they did it because one of their members, her husband, had died of leukemia, and they wanted to get a couch, a comfortable couch to put in the waiting room at the hospital or medical center or whatever it was that he had gotten treatment because his wife had noticed there really was no comfortable place for people to wait. So they did this whole thing. It became a huge success. They raised something like $250,000 with the first issue of the calendar, and I think over like a 3-4 year period they made over $1 million, and that $1 million actually went to build an entire wing to this hospital. And in the course of all that, they were discovered by America. And so they came over here. I think they did Leno. They did a number of things over here. And while they were here, the women who were in that calendar were at a book signing in New York. I think it was at a Barnes and Noble. And at that book signing, a woman came up. It wasn't really a book signing; it was a calendar signing. A woman came up, bought the calendar, had them sign it, and said to the woman who signed it, maybe it's that $1 million that they were waiting for that was going to make the difference in the leukemia research. And the calendar girl just said, oh, what a thing to say. But imagine if that's what it takes. If it's people who are just taking these little steps that, for whatever reason, they were just doing it because they were trying to do one thing for their little WI, or they're trying to do one thing for their father. Imagine if that actually did lead to some massive outpouring of financial help that led to the discovery of the cure of leukemia. What a concept.
And all I see is a little trail of breadcrumbs in England and this huge trail of breadcrumbs going over to America, and then that's had to happen that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Gabe, I think you've hit the nail on the head in a way that many other authors don't. I guess really probably your best asset that you bring to this is that you cut through the fluff. You cut right to the pith. That's
exactly it.
Yeah, and that's very cool stuff.
And it's only because I read so many fluffy books that I knew what not to do.
There's a lot of them out there, aren't there?
Yeah. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So before we lose you, first, when's the sequel coming out?
I have absolutely no idea.
Oh,
to be
okay.
honest. No clue. But I just wrote another little book about writing, how to actually write, and it's kind of it doesn't say it on there, but it's like a fruit fly's guide to writing. Oh, and that it's about cutting out all the fluff, and it's cutting out all of the negative thoughts that you'll bump into, and just write. And it's not like, oh, make sure that you write that instead of which, or you're with an apostrophe. It has none of that. Like, you can find that in another writing book. And this is how to write from the heart. So that should be out pretty soon. Not exactly sure when, but I'll be updating on Twitter or Facebook or wherever else people can find me.
Sounds almost like it's your 21st response to the 20th century Strunk and White, which writers would probably know about.
Yeah, exactly. But mine's only 20 pages long.
Well, very good. Gabe Berman, before we lose you, where can people find out more about you online? Are there blogs or websites or whatever they can read your stuff?
Well, I'm always available on Facebook. It's just my name, or Twitter, which is just Gabe Berman, GabeBerman. My book is available, hopefully, in any store, or you can just find it online on Amazon or BNN.com. And it's Live Like a Fruit Fly. My name's Gabe Berman, and it's The Secret You Already Know. And I do have a blog that I update once in a while. It's called, Oh My God, it's actually Oh My Gabe, OMGABE. So what I do in that thing is I just write letters to people who I'd never really be able to write letters to, like Springsteen, or I write letters to life, or I write letters to miracles. And sometimes it's funny, but it always ends kind of seriously, and it's worth checking out.
Okay, very good. And we'll make sure that we include a link to the book on Amazon so people can find it that way, too. Gabe Berman, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks so much for the opportunity.
We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.